Right now I'm standing just outside of our fenced-in garden area where we've got a whole lot of trees and shrubs heeled in. And in this video I'd like to talk about the idea of heeling in trees and shrubs, some logistics around that, especially in colder climates. We're about ready to plunge into some very cold moments the next few days. We need to get these plants protected and sheltered before we enter that. Maybe you just got some bare root trees or cuttings from us or another nursery and it's about to get cold and you're not ready to plant. Heeling in is a technique for holding them until the conditions are right to get them planted in their final position. Let me explain. One thing you'll notice is that the area that we're using to heel in or to hold these dormant plants until spring is relatively well protected. We get rabbits in here once in a while, but we certainly don't get deer in here. We're in a fenced-in area within a fenced-in area. So if you're trying to hold plants that are dormant in a landscape, consider somewhere of a pretty decently well-protected area already. Maybe it's a raised bed that you built that has nice wooden sides that you can really settle stuff in, and maybe even put a mesh over top. Having that physical protection from herbivory is nice because creatures are hungry in the winter and your plants are delicious. You can see by my clothing and by the snow on the ground and the sound of this that we are below freezing. We're going to get quite a bit colder over the next few days. However, where the plants are heeled in, so for example, this is all Nanking cherry, which just the other day we dug down into the soil. There was a crust of ice on the surface, but we dug down through that. And you can see that these plants are actually buried deeper than if we were to plant them out in a field. I don't really want to pull them all the way out because I don't want to expose them, but you get the idea. The actual soil line is way down here. We planted this group communally in here and really laid it on thick with the soil. And the idea with this you see all throughout. So here's, for example, about, I would guess, maybe upwards to 200 persimmon trees planted communally, super deeply, with mulch on top. The mulch we're using is sawdust. We also will use shredded leaves, we'll use wood chips. What we want to avoid is having a lot of deep hay. You can see I just pulled this away from the soil. It's insulating the soil in anticipation of this, but we want this a little bit away from the plants. Very, very deep hay and straw, especially when it's dry, is great vole habitat, and we want to keep that down to a minimum. So nice chunky wood chips are great, sawdust, leaves, but let's skip the hay and straw. In fact, here's an area where I was using hay a little bit recently because we had a previous cold snap and I wanted to hold the warmth. Hay is a great insulator, but leaving it there over winter is problematic. And so in this area I'm going to pull this hay away. And in fact, if I look closely through here, there are a couple vole tunnels that are forming that I'll need to address. So here's where somebody was going through a little bit. With persimmon, they don't seem to ever really eat the roots, so I'm not too worried about that. But where I see voles, or at least a little bit of movement, I want to collapse any of their tunnels. I want to get a little bit better compaction. I'm not trying to pound it in. I'm definitely not using a cement pounder or something, but I want to get it a little bit tighter, and I'm going to add a little bit more soil on top. Now we could go out and get soil from other areas, but we like to mulch our walkways immensely throughout the growing season. So you can see this is old sawdust and soil from below. We'll add all sorts of materials to our walkways, both for weed suppression, but also for soil building and fungal work and all that kind of stuff. And also, when we need soil, it's a very short commute to rob it from the walkways and go a little bit deeper around our plants. So I'll scrape a little bit more from here. I'll let the hay stay a little. I'm not going to get too intense about it, but for the most part I'll get the hay out. And so that's a mixture now of soil and sawdust, because that's what was in this walkway. In the spring or next summer, some other time. Sorry friend, this is too cold for you to be rudely knocked out like that. We can refill the walkways later with wood chips or leaves or sawdust and go from there. But you can see all throughout here, yep, the hay's got to go. Having seen a little bit of vole activity, and we'll replace it with some soil. I'm not going to get too intense about breaking it up perfectly and fine, but I do want to get deeper and deeper material on here. We're going to see 4 degrees Fahrenheit Sunday evening, and that's cold enough to damage roots if they're up too close to the surface of the soil. So rob from the walkway to build the bed and heel in our plants deeper and deeper. Some plants are hardier than others. Most of the ones we work with are extremely hardy, like our Siberian peach and our northern adapted hazelnuts. They can be barely covered and they're just fine. And then there's characters like the pawpaw, which have somewhat tender root systems. They don't really like getting frozen hard. In fact, it can kill them. And so what we do, you can see there's more soil, there's more compost that's been healed in or piled up around these pawpaws. And coming into the idea of it being 4 degrees overnight in a few nights, I'm going to go ahead. I don't want to bury them. I don't want them completely hidden so we can't find them in the spring, but it really doesn't hurt to go up that stem quite a bit. We have some figs and some pomegranates that are out here that are marginally hardy to this area. I should cover them a little bit more too. So in this bed, we're not as organized as we could be, but we're not too bad either. Here are some chestnuts and hazelnuts I'm not as worried about. If time allows, I can get more soil. But these are a Russian variety of pomegranate and a variety of fig. This fig, this tall, is probably going to get injured by the winter no matter what. But we can give them a little bit more insurance by, again, just going up a little higher. If it was very loose, dry hay, we're asking for trouble, but with this soil mixed with sawdust, we're really building some nice richness for next growing season in the bed and insulating and sheltering these plants a little bit more. You get the idea. Healing in dormant plant material in advance of cold weather is a nice way to hold the value of the plants, hit the pause button so that they're not waking up early. Please don't take dormant plants and cuttings and store them in really warm, really bright locations in midwinter. They'll wake up too early. This is fine for them even if it gets really cold. It's just the depth of soil with some insulation is really helpful. We've done this with thousands of trees and it works great. Let's take a quick look at some cuttings and how we hold those for winter as well. This is where we dump windrows of sawdust that we use for manures and for mulch and things like that. As well as for shipping. We actually use this sawdust for shipping. And this is a really convenient place for us to hold dormant bare root cuttings in advance of planting them out. So these are some cuttings we got from our lovely friend Akiva at Twisted Tree Nursery. And this happens to be Streamco. These were leftovers from when he and I were processing willow. And these have no roots on them whatsoever. Believe it or not, willow, elderberry, and currant, if you leave them like that, somehow they don't die in the winter, but it seems awfully rude. But just knowing that they're capable of that is pretty amazing. We do want to get these planted out in a nursery bed sometime, and ideally ASAP, but until then we can bank them in sawdust. This could be soil or compost, aged wood chips. We don't want it to be a hot compost pile or hot steaming wood chips, but sawdust works great. These are much longer cuttings. These happen to be elderberry, which we will be field planting when we get another break. But for now, we know that they're comfortable in here like this. Again, this is Yastaberry field cuttings, so we offer these locally. We'll be able to push these in once the ground thaws again. And if we can't get to it until April, they'll probably have rooted quite a bit by then and be ready to go. We're in the garage for a moment looking at some other options for holding plant material. These are all dormant cuttings that we have banked that we're going to hand off to our friend Michael for a food distribution program that they're going to be growing these out. These are cuttings that are unrooted, cuttings that are left over from our sale, banked in sawdust. We'll hold them in the garage so they don't freeze solid. They can, it would be fine, but they don't freeze solid, so we can get them field planted during the next break. This keeps it a little bit mobile, but I wouldn't do this as our main way of storing cuttings. We also have some full-length cuttings that we haven't broken down and processed. I'd like to get these banked into sawdust so that we can either plant them in the next week or two if we get a good thaw, or they can wait until spring and be in a good way. Just like our other cuttings here, we just need to make sure the bottoms are held in media, in this case the moist sawdust, but I don't want to go too shallow. I'd like to protect them a little. So what I'll do here is just open up a nice gap. You can see it's getting cold enough that a lot of this stuff is seizing up and freezing. I'm not worried about ice or frozenness up against the stalks. I'm just worried about them being freezing with absolutely no moisture around them. So in other words, just freezing in the open winter air. They would survive it, but it's hard on them. Here I can just settle them in. This is a pink currant and a red currant. They're bound and labeled in each group. And I'll just make sure that a fair bit of the stem is covered. You'll notice we're not putting insulation or like heat or plastic over them. We're not trying to change the temperature around them. We're just holding the root system or holding the stems at a cool, moist state. Freezing is okay, but not raw, full winter cold. And the dryness that comes with really cold, fast air moving temperatures, it can really desiccate stems. Healing in dormant plant material is a very important technique for especially northern growers, and something to have in your toolkit. It's a really fast way to receive dormant plant material from a nursery like us in the winter, or it's a little too cold in the spring, or you're just not into it. When the plant material arrives, it's a way to hold the plants in a good, healthy, safe way until you're ready to plant, ideally before they break dormancy. You can see here a 4 by 16 garden bed can hold probably upwards to 1,000 plants. There's willow, there's senna, there's elderberry, there are black currants, all in groups ready to go. We'll wait for the next good thaw and try to get them in the earth, or we'll wait for spring and we'll plant them then. But we know with good healed in techniques at play here, these plants can stave off the cold of really some very, very brutal winter temperatures without any winter injury. Healing in, it's a nice technique. Hope it works for you.